Hello and welcome to the Power Pod. I'm your host, Matthew Cohen, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Natalie Sanandaji, who is a Persian Jewish activist and the public affairs officer at the Combat Anti-Semitism movement. Natalie, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Great, thank you. So just to set the stage for the conversation, a lot of the people on the YouTube channel are from South Africa, and something quite worrying's been going on. So, of course, Iran has been in the headlines
Mm.
across the world as of late, and South Africa's government has taken a pretty troubling stance. So, a few days ago, we saw how the UN Human Rights Council actually had a vote on basically condemning the amount of violence happening in Iran, and South Africa decided to abstain, making it only one of the few countries that did so. And beyond that, we know how South Africa took Israel to the ICJ on an accusation of genocide, but here they're silent. And what I think
Mhm.
is even more worrying for a lot of South Africans is that in the mainstream media, they're just not seeing any news on Iran at all. And even certain places where they have seen news, like I myself was checking, huge news agencies are really giving very limited coverage. So, that being said, Natalie, do you mind giving a bit of a breakdown, given your background, of what actually is happening in Iran for those who might not know?
So currently, what is happening in Iran? The people have finally kind of tried to take things into their own hands and gone into the streets and are really trying to make it so that the Islamic regime, which is currently in power, which is also what we refer to in kind of the Jewish activist world as the head of the snake. They fund Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis. And not only have they been hurting Jews and funding hate and anti-Semitism against Jews all around the world, but they are hurting their own people. And as an activist who's been speaking out about the atrocities of October 7th and about the rise in anti Semitism all over the world since October 7th, who is Persian and has a Persian last name, I can say that like majority of the messages of love and support for my activism that I've received in the past 2 years or more has been from the Iranian community, whether it's Iranians within Iran or in the diaspora. And I guess out of everyone in the world, out of every kind of like subculture in the world, they were the one people I didn't have to explain to as to like what this war is about and who's funding Hamas. Like they understood that better than anyone because our biggest enemy as the Jewish community is the same as their biggest enemy. It's the Islamic regime of Iran who is killing their own people. And they've been living under this regime for over 40 years, almost 50 years. And this regime has taken away so many of their rights, and anyone who has tried to speak out against the regime has suffered major consequences, whether it's being tortured or killed by the regime. And finally, the people have had enough. They've had enough, and they have taken to the streets calling for the son of the last Shah of Iran to come back. And obviously, the regime was not happy about this. So when people start to take to the streets, the regime ordered its, I guess, military to take to the streets as well and fire aimlessly at anyone who's protesting. Um, and the issue is that right now that we don't really have exact numbers as to how many people have died. The last numbers I kind of saw online that seemed to be the most accurate, it seems to be over 30,000. And it's incredibly sad to see. It's incredibly sad to see how many of the younger generation in Iran are now gone because a lot of the people taking to the streets are that younger generation who want to see a change in their country, who want to see a better future for themselves, for their own children. Um, and it's incredibly sad And it's also very sad to see the silence coming from the rest of the world. As someone who saw a lot of silence come from majority of the world when it came to the atrocities of October 7th, I'm now seeing silence again when my people are being attacked again. I consider the people in Iran to be my people as much as I consider those in Israel to be my people. And as someone who is in Israel who survived an attack by Hamas, which is funded by the IRGC, um, I'm really praying every day for all those in Iran who are currently being attacked. I'm seeing messages that randomly when the government Wi-Fi outages are not in place and suddenly people have service to reach out to their family in the diaspora, I see some of the messages that Iranians are sending their families, and the messages that they're writing sound exactly like the messages that I was sending my family and friends about October 7th. I saw messages saying we were running and there were so many of us running and I was watching people being shot down and falling all around me and I was just hoping that I wouldn't be shot. And um, it's just incredibly triggering to see those messages come from within Iran, to see, my people being attacked once again.
Of course. And I think what makes this so relevant, as you alluded to, Natalie, is that you're somebody with a very strong personal connection both to Iran and the Persian people, but also to Israel and the Jewish people. And I'd love to ask you about that. But before I do, something
Hmm.
that you mentioned is quite eye-opening, I think, for a lot of people, which is the fact that the Iranian people who you're speaking about are very much against this government, because I think for a lot of people who are outside of the region, they don't realize this. A lot of people, for example, I speak to in South Africa, seem to think that Iran, the government, and the Islamic regime speaks for the people. And so you've just got this sort of notorious country that's the head of the snake, as you put it. So it's very eye-opening to hear. So that being said, just specifically what I said about the South African government, I guess then, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems as if what the South African government is doing is not only being on the wrong side of history by standing with the Islamic regime, but they're actually standing against the people of Iran.
So that is correct. That what you said, that most people think that the regime speaks for the people of Iran, and um, I've said this so many times. I can't necessarily blame people for their past ignorance, but I can hope that because of what was happening in Israel, that maybe they would do some research and they would also do research into Iran, into the IRGC, which funded Hamas, and they would understand that the IRGC does not speak for the Iranian people. But I've seen time and time again that people choose to not do their own research. People just choose to hear something that they saw on TikTok and they consider that to be factual, and they kind of just run with that. And it's unfortunate that so many people think that the IRGC speaks for the Iranian people. They don't understand that the IRGC has been holding the Iranian people hostage for about 47 years, that the Iranian people were tricked into kind of voting the IRGC into power only to have all their rights taken away. And another thing a lot of people don't understand, that I won't go too much into detail about it right now, but it's the fact that Carter, when he was president, he helped get rid of the Shah that was in power in Iran at the time and helped Khomeini, the head of the IRGC, come into power for their own benefits, for oil benefits. And many Iranians blame Carter for that. They blame Carter for the fall of their beautiful country, a country that,
Sorry, are we speaking about the US President Jimmy Carter, correct?
yeah.
Okay, perfect. Just making sure.
So many Iranians blame that current that president that was the president of the United States at the time for the fall of Iran. And especially as as a Persian Jew, majority of my family left Iran either right before the revolution or right after the revolution to flee persecution and to come to the United States for a better life. Obviously, I knew about what Iran was like before the revolution, but majority of Americans, the majority of, I guess I would say, people all over the world who aren't Persian, who aren't Iranian, they they don't understand that Iran isn't always the country that they see on the news today, and that it was once so free and so beautiful, and that it once had such a close relation with Israel. Many people don't realize that out of all the Jews in the around the world, like in the diaspora, that Persian Jews, I think, are one of the ones that feel as closely connected to the land that they were living in outside of Israel, because we were in what we call galut, we were exiled from Judea twice. Um, I think Persian Jews feel the most closely connected to the place that they were living in because it was one of the only places where they didn't have to flee so many times. They didn't have to deal with persecution. Um, yeah, a lot of people don't seem to understand that that Islam didn't make its way to what was the Persia or current day Iran um, until many years after Judaism made its way to the region. So, like the first religion in that region was Zoroastrianism, and then Jews ended up there after the first exile from Judea. And then when I don't know if you want to go into like the whole history, but when King Cyrus liberated the Jews and said, you guys can go back to Judea, many Jews chose to stay in Iran. And my family is part of that group that chose to stay in Iran for about 2,000 years. That didn't go back when the Jews were able to go back to Judea and didn't experience the second exile. Um, and many people find that so surprising when I tell people that my mom is Israeli and my father is Iranian. Their first question tends to be like, "Oh, what is it like to be half Muslim, half Jewish?" People don't realize that Zoroastrianism was like the first religion in Iran, and then came the Jews, and then, there was like Islam's and also the Baha'is. Um, so there's really so much that people don't understand about the region that I guess, I don't know if it's school curriculum that has failed them. I don't know if it's just ignorance and not thinking enough to do your own research. I don't know who to blame for the fact that people seem to be so misinformed about Iran. But that's something that I've been really advocating for ever since I started speaking out about October 7th and about anti-Semitism around the world. I felt that it was just as necessary to speak out about Iran and to teach people about Iran and to teach people about the history of the Jewish people in Iran, because that really ties into what this war is actually all about.
Of course. And something that you touched on there, which I think is really interesting for us to unpack, is your personal background. I heard you mention how you've got one parent who is of Iranian descent and then one
Hmm.
who is Israeli. So would you mind giving us a little bit more of an insight, Natalie, into who you are, what your background is, and I think just ultimately why this issue is so important to you?
Yeah, so my mother was born and raised in Israel, and my father was born and raised in Iran. But previous to my mother's parents moving to Israel, her family was also in Iran since, as I mentioned, from this first exile from Judea. And that's why I feel such a close connection to Iran and to the people of Iran, because that's as much a part of my family history as being a Jew is. And you know, my uncle, my mom's brother, when he finished the army in Israel, he did a whole Euro trip, and at the end of his trip, he went to Iran. This was pre-revolution, of course, when people were able to freely travel between Iran and Israel. And he came back and he said that Iran was more beautiful and more fun than all of Europe. And
Amazing.
and that was a big thing for me. That really, hearing that myself really opened my eyes as to what Iran was really like. And it was so important for me to explain to the rest of the world that that's the real Iran. The Iran that you see today is Iran that's being held hostage by a terrorist organization. And I really felt that showing the rest of the world that the majority of love and support that I've received is from the Iranian people would hopefully open their eyes to what this war is really about, and the fact that many of them are standing on the wrong side of history.
Of course. And it's just very interesting to hear you explain how, I mean, not only did your uncle serve in the Israeli military in the IDF, but he actually was able to travel to Iran at the same time. And I remember reading
Hmm.
the other day how there even used to be flights between the two countries. So it's
Yeah.
amazing to hear you speak about that, Natalie, and basically how things have changed so much between the old government that was in Iran, and then, of course, the Islamic regime of today. But something that's really interesting to me that you mentioned, Natalie, was that a lot of the love and support that you receive is actually coming from Iranian people. But then at the same time, ironically, contrary to what a lot of people think, it's the Western world that seems to be increasingly anti Semitic or anti Israel. And so that kind of leads me to the question, well, you're the public affairs officer at Combat Anti Semitism Movement, and you're someone who's based in the US. And so you've had a very unique insight into how anti Semitism has spread across the US and the world. And so, what I'd
Hmm.
actually like to ask is, do you see a big difference between the amount of anti-Semitism before October the 7th, as opposed to after October the 7th? Because something that I've noticed, just having been in South Africa and in different parts of the world, is a lot of the governments seem to be playing a role in this, because a lot of these governments who have gone against Israel and, you know, taken on this ICJ case, they just seem to be intent on causing Israel to be seen as sort of the basically demonizing Israel and making the Jewish people look like the enemy. So, yeah, do you think that there is a very big difference between the anti Semitism levels before October the 7th and after?
So I would say there is a big difference in the sense that people feel that they could speak more freely about their anti-Semitic thoughts, but I don't necessarily think that means that the anti-Semitism wasn't there before October 7th. I think it just means that people feel more comfortable speaking about it. Um, Obviously, any of the anti-Semitism that we've seen since October 7th, it was under the surface. I think that's one of the major issues with how they approached anti-Semitism, like right after the Holocaust. Um, they didn't solve the problem. When the Holocaust ended, they didn't get rid of the anti-Semitism that led up to the Holocaust. They just kind of put a
Right.
band-aid on a bullet wound. Um, so do I think there's more anti-Semitism? Yes, in the sense that we're seeing more of it, but it was actually always there, is my answer.
Right. That does actually make a lot of sense, because even though I think a lot of people will think, well, Israel's now in the spotlight, whereas maybe it wasn't as much in the past. I mean, these feelings couldn't have arisen overnight, right? And I guess that's also partially why organizations such as yours exist. So, Natalie, for those people who maybe don't know, could you give us a bit of a breakdown of who Combat Anti-Semitism Movement is and what the purpose of the organization
Mhm.
basically is?
So basically, the Combat Anti-Semitism movement is an American-based Jewish nonprofit. Um, though the organization was started kind of here in the US, our team is really all over the world, everywhere from here in the US to Europe to South America to Israel. And a lot of the work we do is with policymakers, and the majority of the work we do is also interfaith. So while there's a great number of Jewish organizations that are doing amazing work within the Jewish community, our main focus is to work outside the Jewish community. So to work with Christian leaders, Muslim leaders, and our goal is to make the world a safer place for the Jewish people. Obviously, from the name, we're combating anti-Semitism. Whether we're doing that through policy changes, or in some cases, we're trying to work on the public school curriculum so that it includes more Jewish history, because we really do believe that a lot of this anti-Semitism is fueled by ignorance and just lack of knowledge of the Jewish people. Um, and my role at the Combat Anti-Semitism movement is to really speak out, whether it's on the news or at our events that we host or other public speaking engagements I get invited to, and to really explain the aspect of, Iranian Jewish history, of October 7th, and of the anti-Semitism that I've experienced here in the United States and around the world since October 7th.
Right. And just on that note, I couldn't help but notice that a lot of people have been speaking on podcasts and different events about sort of the end of the golden age of US Jewry and just Jewish societies all around the world, and basically saying, with everything going on right now, maybe the time has come to pack up, go to Israel, basically leave whichever countries in the diaspora they're located in. And so, yeah, Natalie, what sort of message would you give, either your own message or Combat Anti-Semitism Movement's message, to people who maybe feel desolate, people who maybe feel hopeless, who are suffering from the anti-Semitism that's going on all around the world?
So I guess I would say that I personally dream of making Aliyah, which means, for anyone listening who doesn't know what that means moving to Israel. Um, I do feel safer on a day-to-day basis when I'm walking the street or getting in a cab or going to the supermarket. I feel safer in Israel than I do anywhere else in the world right now, because everywhere else in the world you see that Jews are randomly being attacked out on the streets, whether they're being punched or stabbed or people try to hit them with cars. I understand why people feel that they kind of just want to give up on their life outside of Israel and pick up and move to Israel. Um, I do think that still doesn't solve the problem of anti-Semitism. If anything, it only causes more of an issue, because if nobody knows any Jewish people, if nobody has any Jewish people in their communities, and they don't see how the Jewish people kind of add to a community rather than making a community a worse place to be, I think it only caused more anti-Semitism. And I'm not necessarily saying that those who want to move to Israel shouldn't. I think that they should. I think that's a great thing. Um, but there are many who want to stay. There are many who don't see a life for themselves in Israel. There are many who are more or less happy with where they're currently living. And for those who want to stay, I think that's great as well, because we need those representatives. Um, it's kind of the same way someone asked me a while back, how I feel about Jewish people in the arts and in politics and in different circles that aren't the Jewish advocacy world, who quote unquote don't speak out enough. Um, and I was with another friend, and my other friend kind of answered the question for me. And I think she gave a better answer than I even could have thought of myself. And that answer really stuck with me ever since then. And now it's become my answer, because I think she's so right. She said that not every Jew has to be a loud, outspoken activist like I am. Many Jewish people who are simply in their circles and who are making a positive impact on the circle that they are in are simply representing us just by being that good person that they are. They don't need to come and yell in people's faces about anti-Semitism and why it's wrong. they're kind of fixing anti-Semitism just by being that good person that they are within their circle, whether it's their work circle or their public like friends circle. Um, they're simply doing a good job by representing Jews in the best way possible. So, do I think it's beautiful that many Jews want to move to Israel? Yes, but I also think it's important that every Jew doesn't disappear and just make its way to Israel, because then nobody will have a good outlook on the Jewish people if they don't know a Jewish person.
Right, right. Well, I think that's a very pragmatic answer, Natalie. So thank you for that. Before we end off, for those who do want to learn a little bit more about the movement, or perhaps want to follow the work that you're getting up to, where can people find you?
So, so my personal Instagram page where people can find kind of the work that I do, the videos that I make, um, that sometimes are in collaboration with the Combat Anti-Semitism movement, and sometimes it's just kind of separate work that I'm doing, but obviously still representing their voice. They can find me on Instagram at Natalie.Sanandaji. They can find me on X at Nat Sanandaji. I'm also on TikTok under Natalie Sanandaji. And in regards to the Combat Anti-Semitism movement, they can find them at our website. Um, and then through our website, they can also find our Instagram page, um, our TikTok, and so on and so forth. So they can find us at combatantisemitism.org. And also through there, they can sign up for our weekly newsletter, um, which is really a great way to kind of keep up with the news of what's happening to the Jewish communities all over the world. Um, Even before October 7th, even before the war started, I found it very hard to trust most like general media in regards to honest reporting.
Sure.
And I feel that a lot of people, I'm sure you can agree with me on that. And since October 7th, we've seen that anytime that people actually post about the Jewish people, anytime there's a big article about the Jewish people, whether it's on Fox or CNN or the New York Times or BBC, they tend to only talk about what's happening to the Jewish people when there's an opportunity to kind of twist the narrative and change the story into
Sure.
something that it's not, and kind of make it out for the Jewish community to be the bad guy. And that's very unfortunate. And I remember even one time I was supposed to speak. I was supposed to speak in an interview, and my interview got canceled because they told me they were going to report on a rocket that fell um, in a hospital in Gaza. And right away, I thought to myself that there was going to be some misreporting here, that they were going to cancel my honest speaking to misreport on what's happening and what the situation is. And of course, as we know, that was one of the most major misreportings that we saw during the war. They said that it was an Israeli rocket. They said it was intentionally sent. They said that it fell on the hospital. In the end, we found out it wasn't an Israeli rocket. It was a rocket sent by Hamas that ended up not reaching Israel and falling in a parking lot next to the hospital. Like, so much went wrong there. And even when they chose to correct themselves, most people don't look at the corrections. Most people see that first article that you put out, and that only causes more anti Semitism. And then generally, when there are things happening to the Jewish communities around the world, we don't see anyone covering it. So I do think for anyone out there, I think that's one of the greatest resources that CAM gives to those who follow us online and who go to our website, is that weekly newsletter, because you can really keep up with what's happening in the Jewish communities all over the world. And it's things that you won't see in the general media. Um, and sometimes you'll see it on Instagram, depending on what account you follow. But our newsletter is really somewhere where you could see all of it all in one place. And I think it's really important to keep up with the Jewish community all over the world. If you care about anti-Semitism, if you care about fighting it, it's important to know the facts and to know what's happening and to know the current events. So yeah, I think everyone should check out our website. I think everyone should go and follow the newsletters that you can get our weekly email updates. And if anyone has any personal questions for me, there's anything that I can help them with, or if they want to ask me more questions about October 7th or about Iran that I haven't answered in our interview, then they could definitely reach out to me through Instagram, through my email that you can find on the website, and I'd be happy to answer them.
Fantastic. Thank you, Natalie. So I'll be sure to post the website for CAM in the description box below. So anybody who wants to learn more about the organization and Natalie's work, please be sure to check that out. Natalie, thank you so much for your time. I certainly enjoyed speaking with you, and I hope that the audience found the discussion as insightful as I have. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Matthew.
All right. So thank you, everybody, for joining. If you enjoyed that, please remember to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I will see you again in the next video. Until next time, I'm Matthew Cohen, and this is the Power Pod.